Chapter 11, 31. Hayfon's Goo Refinement. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Compared to Hayfan, even though I have many immortal goo, I am unable to use all of them to this extent. Fang Yuan reflected upon himself. Hayfon's true inheritance gave him a lot of insight to his problems, but he did not waver. It is great that I can raise so many immortal goo as well. Goo immortals place great focus on their calamities and tribulations. The more they cultivated, the tougher the calamities and tribulations. Hayfan had few immortal goo. His burden of feeding them was low, but he had many methods to deal with all sorts of situations. He accumulated his resources even if he sold them. By storing up immortal essence stones, he could have a huge immortal essence stone stockpile. And Hayfan had a tribe, a super force with the Huangjin bloodline. Hayfan liked to nurture descendants. He had a lot of immortal goo that were not too important. Before setting up the true inheritance, he had given them out to Hay tribe's goo immortals, or placed them into the treasury and passed them down. Hayfan did not have one of the 10 extreme physiques. His immortal aperture had limited potential. The resources he could grow also had a limit. All in all, he fed just a few immortal goo and researched many killer moves for them. It was a very wise choice. But Fang Yuan was different. Different situations needed to be analyzed in depth. The first difference was his sovereign immortal aperture. The sovereign immortal aperture had immense potential. Feeding goo was a burden. Feeding immortal goo was a greater burden. But Fang Yuan could afford to do so, easily in fact. The second difference was that Fang Yuan was alone. He was alone. He only had to care for himself. He did not need to worry for a tribe or give any attention to his descendants. This was the advantage of being a loner. The advantage of a tribe was shared resources and helping each other. But at Hayfan's level, he was the one giving the tribe benefits. But Hayfan had never thought of leaving the tribe. He had grown up in this tribal environment. During his growth, he had received a lot of help from the tribe, relationships, friendships, and kinship. He had all of them. He cared about the tribe and his descendants. The environment that a person grows up in has a huge influence on them. And Fang Yuan was free and unrestrained. He had almost zero burden in this aspect. Even though he joined Langya sect, he was just making use of them. The third difference was that Fang Yuan had huge pressure in survival. He needed a lot of immortal goo. Immortal goo were unique. With a greater number of them in all aspects, they could deal with many situations. For example, he could use Flying Sword immortal goo to attack and Sword Escape immortal goo to retreat. Even without killer moves, Fang Yuan could use immortal goo to deal with many situations. In fact, having many immortal goo was useful and helpful to the construction of immortal killer moves. Immortal killer moves used core immortal goo and supplementary immortal gum. For example, Fang Yuan's sword marks targeting death, a sword path immortal killer move, used Flying Sword immortal goo as the core, and a small number of supplementary sword path immortal goo. If Fang Yuan did not have Flying Sword immortal goo and only had Sword Escape immortal goo, how would he use Sword Escape in place of Flying Sword to unleash sword marks targeting death? Sword Escape replacing Flying Sword was possible. Because the two were sword path immortal goo, they were interchangeable on this basis. But the entire killer move, sword marks targeting death, would need to be heavily altered. Flying Sword was used as an attacking immortal goo. It was easy to construct an offensive killer move with it. But Sword Escape was a movement immortal goo. If it were to replace Flying Sword, the mortal goo used for sword marks targeting death would need to be changed and increased drastically in number. This way, when using sword marks targeting death, the process would be more lengthy and difficult. The failure rate would be higher, and it would have less feasibility as a whole. Looking at it overall, Hayfan's development method suited most people, but it did not suit Fang Yuan. Fang Yuan's goo-raising method was the most optimal for himself. But if other goo immortals mimicked him, they would be courting death. Fang Yuan continued to read. After the immortal killer moves, Hayfan's true inheritance talked about mortal killer moves. There was an even greater number of these killer moves. A large portion of them were time path, but Fang Yuan basically had no need for them anymore. Immortal and mortal was vastly different. Maybe in the future, Fang Yuan could use these methods to probe other goo immortals in battle. but they had little use because Fang Yuan already had a good number of exemplary mortal killer moves. He already had numerous blood path and strength path killer moves. These mortal killer moves might only have one use in the end, to be the foundation for deductions. After the mortal killer moves, there were some incomplete killer moves, including both immortal and mortal killer moves. The completion rate varied. Some were even simply inspired ideas or guesses. These were things that Hayon had never completed even upon his death. Deducing killer moves was unavoidable and essential in a Gu Immortal's cultivation journey. Fang Yuan took a look. Nothing really caught his eye. His time path attainment level was too low, and he could not use Wisdom Gu. Furthermore, Fang Yuan already had many useful methods. They were sufficient. As a result, his browsing of killer moves ended. After returning, I will need to spend a lot of time practicing these killer moves. Fang Yuan planned. The usage of killer moves could end in failure. If during an intense battle the activation fails, the Gu Immortal would suffer a backlash. If it was during a critical moment in battle, that would be terrible. One killer move's success or failure could directly affect the outcome of the battle, or even determine life and death itself. Thus, one had to be extremely familiar and proficient with their killer moves. This would use some funds as well. The supplementary mortal Gu that made up the killer moves needed to be purchased. When practicing, activating immortal killer moves would expend immortal essence, and practicing would definitely occur more than once. All of these required money, money, money. Thus, the development of a Gu Immortal's immortal aperture was extremely important in their cultivation. Finances were the foundation for military might. Fighting was dangerous, and with the threat of calamities and tribulations, unless huge benefits or conflicts were involved, Gu Immortals usually preferred to live in peace instead. To practice so many killer moves, I need a lot of funds. Fang Yuan frowned. He felt both joy and worry. Of course, this was simply a blissful worry. Large numbers of immortal killer moves, even more mortal killer moves, and incomplete killer moves. After looking at them, Fang Yuan moved on to Gu recipes. Immortal Gu recipes, among which the first was the parallel refinement method of immortal level year Gu. There were quite a few parallel refinement Gu recipes. There were a total of 5. They could achieve parallel refinement and elevate year Gu. At the back, Hayon even noted his experiences. He talked about the advantages and disadvantages of all 5 methods, and some tips when undergoing parallel refinement. Just the methods recorded here was incredibly insightful for Fang Yuan. Out of the 5 parallel refinement immortal Gu recipes, the one Hayon used the most was the final one. This immortal Gu recipe was created by Hayon in his later years. It used the least ingredients and had the highest success rate. It expended the least amount of time and mental energy as well. Overall, it used a large number of mortal level year Gu and added them into the immortal level year Gu. Thus, the effect was great. After developing this, Hayon almost abandoned the first 4 Gu recipes. He used this parallel refinement method solely. But because of the comprehensive nature of Hayon's true inheritance, he recorded the 4 recipes into it regardless. Rank 8, Immortal Gu Years. Flow like water can produce countless mortal year Gu. These year Gu can be used to parallel refine immortal level year Gu. It is so convenient. Fang Yuan sighed as he continued looking. Next was the immortal Gu recipe of refining after immortal Gu. Fang Yuan already had this immortal Gu. He only took one glance at it. Overall, the number of immortal Gu recipes was quite shocking. There were nearly 100, and all of them were fully completed immortal Gu recipes. Most were rank 6, some were rank 7, and there were only 2 or 3 rank 8 immortal Gu recipes. In terms of path, most were time path, but there were also other paths like fire path and luck path. Compared to the immortal killer moves, these immortal Gu recipes were more disorganized. There were recently created immortal Gu recipes. There were also ancient recipes with extinct immortal materials. They could not be used anymore. Among all of the immortal Gu recipes, Hayon placed the greatest emphasis on years flow like water. The rank 8 immortal Gu years. Flow like water was actually the creation of Hayon. His inspiration was obtained by constantly parallel refining year gomars. Hayon had described the entire process of refining years flow like water in great detail. In order to get enough immortal materials, he had expended the entire Hay tribe treasury and used up a lot of favors and paid a huge price to ask two refinement path great experts to help. In the end, he was still in a lot of debt. To refine years flow like water, Hayon had placed all of his effort into it. During the refinement process, he had suffered failure after failure. There was several times he wanted to give up. Hayon had recorded all of these mental states down. He was not afraid of his descendants laughing at him. This showed that Hayon had truly put his heart and soul into creating this true inheritance. In the end, because of his relatively good luck, after 9 failures, he finally succeeded. In his words, all of the difficulties and risks that Hayon faced when refining the rank 8 immortal goo was expressed in detail. Even after succeeding, Hayon did not recoup his losses for many years to come. He solemnly warned his inheritor to treasure the fruits of his predecessors' hard work greatly. If they cultivate to rank 8 in the future, when refining rank 8 immortal goo, they had to be extremely careful. Fang Yuan saw this and thought of old ancestor Shuehu. Right now, this old fellow was also refining a rank 8 immortal goo. And this immortal goo was extremely precious. It was fortune-rivaling heaven goo. According to what Lang Ya Land Spirit said, this immortal goo was created in Giant Sun Immortal Venerable's later years using the essence of luck path. Refining rank 8 was a huge gamble. Old ancestor Shuehu had Ma Hong Yun as the main ingredient. It saved him a lot of costs. But even so, when gathering immortal materials, he had discarded his reputation. He went personally to Zombie Alliance to steal immortal zombie corpses. He even went to Hay Tribe's treasury and looted it. The entire snowy mountain-blessed land was in chaos because of his actions. Everyone was worried. Yao Huang was also trying to refine resurrection from the dead immortal Go. According to the rumors in Northern Plains Goo Immortal World, this immortal Goo was also rank 8. Actually, everyone knew about the risks of refining a rank 8 immortal goo. But why did they still try? As a matter of fact, having a rank 8 immortal goo and not having one meant 2 completely different states. Rank 8 goo immortals had to undergo tribulations as well. They usually had low lifespan. Many times, they had no choice but to take a risk. Old ancestor Shuehu was doing this for his tribulation, while Yao Huang was trying to prolong his life. Calamities and tribulations could not hinder Hayon, but he had limited lifespan. He eventually died. Tribulations and lifespan. Fang Yuan knew that in his quest for eternal life, he had to get through these 2 tough problems.